Before the baptism of Rus, the world was imagined differently. People believed in Rod and Makosh, in Perun and Veles, in Prav, Yav and Nav. Forests, winds and flames were not lifeless elements. They were beings, alive, endowed with will. This is the story of what the Slavs believed, how their worlds were arranged, who ruled the sky and who dwelled in the underworld, and how these images survived in folk tales, in rituals, and even in saints. You will discover who truly hides behind the mask of Baba Yaga, and why Ilya Muromets is more than just a bogatyr, but the echo of an ancient god. Suggest in the comments topics for new stories, and subscribe to the channel. New bedtime stories come out here every day. Now let us return to the beginning. At the dawn of time there was no light, no darkness, no air, no water. Everything lay in an unmoving, endless void. The Slavs believed that before all else there existed a vast emptiness, formless, soundless, a state where neither worlds nor fates nor time itself had yet been born. It was not nothing in the ordinary sense, but rather a seed, a hidden embryo of everything that would one day become life. Within that primordial abyss, something began to stir, a faint vibration. It had no shape, no name, but from it came the first motion, the pulse that set the cosmos unfolding. Some legends said it was the first breath, the inhalation of a future world. Others claimed it was a subtle sound, a distant hum, or the crack of a spark in the darkness. Whatever it was the first impulse of creation, the whisper that awakened dormant forces. From this impulse rose the great world tree. Without beginning or end, its roots reached into the deepest shadows of existence, while its crown dissolved into the invisible heights. This tree became the bridge, binding together the three worlds that were yet to come: Nav, the underworld; Yav, the visible realm; and Prav, the higher order above. At that time they were not yet separated, but existed in a kind of seed form, like the shadow of a blossom still hidden in its bud. Nav became the world of ancestors and mysteries. It was not a place of evil, as later tales would claim, but rather the quiet domain where departed souls found rest, where memory and secret knowledge were stored. Yav was our familiar, tangible world, the solid earth of humans, animals, and spirits. Prav was the sphere of law and order, the realm of forces that would govern the cosmos. Gods had not yet been born, but their principles were already present, waiting to take shape. Some traditions told a tale of the first bird, a duck gliding over the endless waters of the primordial ocean. This spirit in the form of a bird carried the ancient symbol of life and beginnings. She dove into the depths and returned with 3 handfuls, one of soil, one of sand, one of stone. She spread the earth, and plains appeared. She scattered the sand, and shores arose. She placed the stone, and mountains grew. Wherever she rested, a tree would sprout. When a feather fell from her wing, the first rain descended, and from the place where a single drop touched the earth, the first blade of grass was born. It was the story of how form emerges from chaos, how life is born from stillness. The old ones used to say, "Before the gods, there was the duck." And in this phrase lay a revelation, that at the dawn of creation, it was not personalities that acted, but the nameless forces of nature, their images needing neither face nor name. Another tradition told of beginnings not through beings, but through opposites, light and darkness, cold and warmth, rest and movement. These pairs did not clash, they balanced. Together they wove the first rhythm of existence, and in that rhythm slow and unhurried, the fabric of the future world began to unfold as though time itself was only just learning how to flow. Cycles appeared, light followed shadow, silence gave way to sound, breath alternated with stillness. It was this eternal alternation that became the foundation for the first laws of the cosmos. Order appeared, not imposed from above, but arising gently from the very pulse of the universe. This order was not rigid. It pulsed like a living body. It allowed things to grow, decay, break apart, and come together again. And only when the three worlds, Nav, Yav, and Prav, found their shape, only when their motions took on a steady rhythm, did the way open for the birth of more complex powers. These powers would later receive names and faces. Rod, Lada, Svarog, Veles, and Perun. They would fight, love, sacrifice, and create their laws, but all that was yet to come. For now, in the silence between worlds, there was only the soft rustle of the leaves of the world tree, growing in the void, lit by nothing but the premonition of life. And that rustle was the first voice of the universe. When the tree grew strong, and the three worlds drew their boundaries, it was time for the first manifestations of divine power, not as separate spirits, but as enduring principles, embodying the design of creation itself. The first of these, the Slavs said, were Rod and Lada. Rod was not a god in the human sense, but the beginning of all beginnings, the ancestor of everything living and unsouled. He had no face, no human form, and yet he was revered as the force that gave life and order to all that exists. Rod did not create the world from nothing. He birthed it from within, as if the universe were his body. His name carried the idea of origin, of generations bound by blood, of the lineage itself as a single unbroken thread. The elders used to say, "From Rod comes everything." His image was not personal but all-embracing. Rod was breath, essence, and the beginning of destiny for every being. Lada appeared as his counterpart, not opposing, but balancing. She embodied harmony, love, and concord. Her arrival was tied to warmth in the world, to the blossoming of order not only in the heavens but within the human heart. She was the motherly presence, the guardian of fertility, joy, and the quiet peace of home and land. Without Lada there would be no unity. Without her, forces would scatter. She softened, she reconciled, she bound together. And so, when spring arrived, when songs and dances filled the villages, her name was spoken most often. With Lada, the world awakened. With Lada, new life began. But beyond harmony, what was waiting to be born? And so the ancients said that from the union of Rod and Lada was born Svarog, the heavenly god, the smith of order, the guardian of craft. He was the first to bring fire to humankind, not merely as a raw element, but as a power capable of reshaping the world. They told that Svarog forged the sky itself, set the sun in its eternal path across the heavens. He taught people to melt metal, to raise their homes, to live according to rules that brought harmony. He was called the celestial blacksmith, and in every strike of his hammer, legend said, a new order rang into being. Stars, seasons, rituals, laws. His fire was not destructive but creative. It became the symbol of the hearth, of justice, of duty. Farmers and smiths would bow to the flames before their work, whispering for his blessing, asking his strength to guide their labour. In some myths, Svarog was said to be the father of two radiant sons, Perun, lord of thunder, and Dazbog, god of sun and light. One would carry the hammer of storm, the other the torch of the day. Together they continued their father's work, but each with a destiny of his own. Then, from beneath the roots of the world tree, out of swamps, forests, and the hidden waters of the underworld arose another, Veles, god of wisdom, of herds, of trade, of secrets buried in the earth. If Svarog ruled the heights of the heavens, Veles reigned in the depths below. His power was not blinding, but vast, all-encompassing. Veles knew the language of animals. He oversaw fertility, guarded the dead, and shared knowledge with those who were ready to receive it. Herdsmen called his name when their cattle strayed. Merchants prayed to him for fair exchange. Healers sought his guidance in herbs and charms. In tales he shifted shape, becoming beast, serpent, or a bent old man with a staff. He was the keeper of oaths, the guardian of bargains. With him dwelled the idea of balance, the invisible fairness of the world. But where there is secrecy, there is always a force that seeks to guard the open. From the heavens came Perun, the god of thunder and lightning, the lord of warriors, the protector of law. He was the stormbringer, the wielder of lightning bolts that struck the earth whenever oaths were broken, whenever rebellion rose, whenever the rhythm of the cosmos faltered. His thunderbolts did not only burn, they purified, they restored justice. Thus, in Slavic myth, Perun and Veles were never just two gods, but two opposing interwoven powers. The tale tells that once Veles climbed from Nav, crept along the trunk of the world tree, and stole the treasures of the gods, herds, wisdom, charms, sacred tokens. It was not an act of evil, but a test of strength, a trial of endurance, and Perun's fury was about to shake the skies, so the people believed. When Perun discovered the theft, his rage split the heavens. Lightning speared the earth, thunder roared across valleys and rivers. Every storm was a retelling of that eternal chase. When thunder rolled, they whispered. It was Perun hurling his bolts. When rain poured down, they said the lightning had struck true. When stillness fell again, Veles had slipped back into his shadowed kingdom beneath the roots of the world. This battle had no end. It repeated every year. Its echoes resounded in the changing of the seasons, in the fertility of the soil, in the tempests of the sky. Spring was the time of Perun, bright, loud, just. Autumn was the season of Veles, misty, gentle, hidden. People lived between these forces, submitting to their rhythm, observing rites to keep the fragile balance intact. Thus the chief deities of the Slavs were affirmed: Rod, the primal essence; Lada, his equal companion; Svarog, the founder of order; Veles, the keeper of hidden knowledge and fertility; Perun, the defender of law and justice. They were not worshipped with temples and dogmas as in later religions. They were felt, invoked, honoured with bread, honey, and water. To them people turned in times of hardship, and to them they gave thanks for rain and sunlight. The Slavic pantheon was not a gallery of distant abstractions, but a living web of powers bound together like kin. These gods did not rule from above. They were within, in life, in earth, in sky, in human breath. And in their eternal interconnection lay the first law of Slavic cosmology. All existence depends on balance, between light and shadow, order and mystery, force and wisdom. From the earliest times, the Slavs envisioned the world as layered. Everything that surrounded them, the sky, the earth, the waters, the forest, the winds, was not merely nature but links in a system, each with its own laws, its own boundaries. The universe unfolded in three interwoven levels: Prav, Yav, and Nav. This threefold structure was not a distant philosophy, but something felt daily, in rituals, in language, in the rhythm of ordinary life. Prav was the higher realm, the place of gods, ancestral spirits, and guardians who had reached purity. It was not simply above, but a brighter, more ordered reality. Prav was the realm from which harmony, meaning, and cosmic order flowed. There stood the halls of Svarog, of Perun, and of other deities who sustained the rhythm of being. Each had their sphere, but none ruled alone. They acted as keepers of foundations, justice, fertility, light, wisdom, love. For people, Prav was not untouchable. It revealed itself in signs, a clear sky, a fortunate turn of fate, the quiet strength of conscience. It was said the one who lived truthfully, in harmony with kin and nature, was already close to Prav, even without knowing it. Yet if the highest world gave order, what of the realms beneath? Beneath Prav lay Yav, the world of people, of all living beings. It was the realm that could be seen and touched, the place where a human was born, lived, and died. Yav was the field of action, of trials, of choices. Here the influences of higher and lower powers converged. Here destiny unfolded. In Yav, every act mattered. The world was sensitive to how one treated life, the land, the body, the voice, and other people. It was here that responsibility was tested. The thread of each soul was woven in Yav, a thread that determined the path it would travel beyond death. The home was considered the centre of Yav, not merely a shelter, but a sacred space where streams from all three worlds met. The hearth was seen as an entry to Prav. The threshold was the border with Navy, and the human being stood as the axis that joined them all. Below Yav stretched Nav, the world of the dead, of shadows, of dreams, of memory and forgetting. Nav was not cursed, nor was it a realm of evil. It was necessary, natural. Here dwelled the souls of the departed, and their fate depended on how they had lived, how they were buried, and how they were remembered by descendants. The souls of honoured ancestors, remembered and invoked at feasts, could become protectors of the clan, guardians of wisdom. But the souls of the forgotten, of those who died violently or without rites, might remain restless, wandering, even harmful. Nav was the domain of Veles, not as its absolute master, but as its guide. He guarded its boundaries, watched over the passage of souls, and preserved hidden knowledge about life and death. Within Nav also lived ancient spirits and powers little understood, yet always felt. Among them was Chernobog, not a god of evil, but the embodiment of dissolution and endings, the necessary force of decay in the cycle of existence. Nav did not lie simply beneath Yav. It touched it. Forests, swamps, burial mounds, lonely ravines, river mouths, all were places where Nav pressed close to the surface. Crossroads carried special meaning. They were thresholds, symbolic doors between worlds. Offerings were left there, fires lit, spells recited. One never challenged Nav, and even more so, never entered its domain without cause. Those who crossed its border without respect invited misfortune. The boundaries between worlds were guarded not by walls or soldiers, but by invisible laws. There were presences unseen, stationed at the crossings, watching. One of these was Merets, the spirit of the threshold, the keeper of the line between Yav and Nav. He was never depicted, never praised loudly, but his presence was known. If the flame of a candle trembled without wind, if the house suddenly grew heavy with silence, as though the air itself thickened, it meant Meris was near. And then one had to be careful. No noise, no whispers of ill words, no glance into mirrors after midnight, for the boundary was listening. Customs arose around those unseen borders. Before stepping across the threshold of a house, a person bowed 3 times. Before sleep, they untied their belt, a symbol of loosening the zard against Nav. At Trinity, wreaths were braided and set afloat on rivers, a gesture from Yav acknowledging the limits of Nav and asking for its favour. Even the dying were given a coin in their hands, not as payment to Charon, as in Greek lore, but as a sign that the soul would never forget its way home. Prav, Yav and Nav were not 3 separate dimensions, but a single woven fabric, where every movement in one world echoed in the others. The world of gods, the world of humans, and the world of the dead were bound together, like day bound with night, like the roots of a tree bound with its leaves. The Slavs lived with this awareness always. Their houses stood in Yav, but above them towered Prav, and beneath them lay Nav. Everything was connected. Every word, every gesture, every remembrance or feast carried weight. They were not superstition. They were ways of speaking with what was unseen, yet real. The world was not split into spiritual and material. It breathed with one breath, where everything was dependent, where nothing was empty. So too was time itself. The Slavs did not carve their days into weeks and months as we do. They felt the year differently. For them it was not a line but a circle, where everything returned, everything repeated, yet never in the same way. It moved like a spiral, inscribing memory into each new ring. This circle was called the Wheel of the Year. Every turn brought festivals dedicated to the forces of nature, to the shift of seasons, to the gods and spirits upon whom life depended. The wheel began with Kolyda, the winter feast of the solstice, when the longest night gave birth to a new sun. In that dark hour, the Slavs believed a child of light was born, the symbol of returning warmth, of fresh life, of the new year. Villagers gathered for round dances, sang ritual carols, wore masks of animals, baked ceremonial pastries, welcomed guests, and went from house to house with blessings. Kolyda, they said, was not only a festival, but the very name of the newborn son, guarded by gods and humans until he grew strong enough to bring heat to the earth. Wreaths of hay and ribbons were hung in windows to protect homes from wandering forces that prowled in the longest nights. Then came Maslenitsa, the ancient celebration of spring's arrival, older than its later Christian overlays. Maslenitsa was the farewell to winter, the awakening of fertility. Markets thrived. Pancakes, symbols of the sun, were baked. Children slid down hills, and circles of dance wound through villages. At the end, a straw effigy of winter was burned. The fire was cleansing, yes, but it was also the ritual end of the old year, and in its ashes, something always waited to rise. Maslenitsa marked the great turning of the wheel from death to life, from stillness to motion. When the earth awakened fully, the season of spring rites began, dedicated to Jiva, the goddess of vitality, of growth, of waters and grasses. In her honour people sang Vesnyanki, the songs of spring. Girls joined hands in ritual circles calling the season forth. Homes were cleansed, barns purified, wells blessed. On the festival of Jiva, people went to rivers and lakes. They washed their hands, bathed their children, cast bread into the waters to appease Rusalki and the spirits who lived in the depths. It was also the time of the first thunder, the sign that Perun had awoken, that his power had returned to guard crops and truth. At the height of summer came the most powerful, the most enchanted celebration. Kupala, the night of fire and water, of purification and love. It fell on the day of the summer solstice, when the sun stood at its highest. On this night, maidens wove wreaths of flowers, young men lit bonfires. All together they danced in circles, leapt through flames, set wreaths adrift upon the water, and searched for the mythical fern flower. For they believed that in this night the earth revealed its secrets, that herbs gained special strength, and that the boundaries between worlds grew thin. Kupala was linked with Dazbog, the sun god who bestowed growth, and with Lada, goddess of love and harmony. Some rites even included symbolic weddings, promises of loyalty, and divinations for a future spouse. But after Kupala, the wheel slowed. The sun no longer climbed so high, days began to shorten. It was the time of the spas, festivals of harvest and gratitude, honey spas, apple spas, nut spas. These were days of sharing, of gathering, of storing. People said, "What you gather at spas, that you will live on through winter." And when autumn deepened, there came one of the most solemn observances, Veles' nights, coinciding with the final harvest and the meeting of light and darkness. These were nights of remembrance, when the living turned their hearts to the dead. Windows glowed with candles, tables were set with food for departed souls. There was no loudness, no curses, no music. It was a time of quiet, for it was believed the ancestors came to rest by the hearth, to see how the family lived, to warm themselves, to offer counsel. In some homes, a stool was set by the door, a woolen cloak laid on a bench, a cup of water placed on the windowsill. These were not empty symbols, but gestures of living conversation with one's own. The cycle of the year ended with the reign of Mara, goddess of winter, of death, of sleep and rebirth. She was not feared but honoured. Mara came with frost, with frozen earth, with air that rang like glass. Songs were not sung in her name, but charms were whispered. Bread was covered, wool was spun, families gathered. Her power did not destroy. It preserved, it sealed, it protected, it gave rest. Through her passed the ending of one circle and the beginning of another. And it was Mara who carried the wheel toward the next Koleda, the birth of light once again. Thus, every feast in the life of a Slav was not merely a reason for merriment or a crowded table. Each celebration was a turning point on the circle, a moment where the world itself spoke to a person, through fire and water, through bread and honey, through ashes and silence. Every rite was the trace of an ancient wisdom that did not divide religion from daily life, nor spirit from nature. All was woven together, all breathed in the same rhythm. Those who lived in harmony with the wheel of the year felt themselves part of something greater, of kin, of land, of time, of the living world. Life for the Slavs unfolded not only under the gaze of gods or among their own kind, but also in the constant presence of beings who belonged neither to the bright Prav nor to the shadowed Nav, but who were interwoven into the very fabric of Yav. These were the spirits of places, of forces, of elements, recognized, respected, feared. They were not good, they were not evil, they simply were, and their presence required care, memory, ritual. They revealed themselves in the creak of a floorboard, in milk that soured too quickly, in the whisper of wind through branches, and so each generation handed down stories, so that the living might coexist with the unseen. The domovoi, the closest of spirits, lived within the home itself, most often behind the stove or beneath the threshold. He was the keeper of order, the protector of family, the witness to every word and deed beneath the roof. His name was not spoken aloud without reason, but he was honoured. A morsel of food might be left for him at night. A hand might caress the corner of the hearth. His help might be asked before moving to a new house. When a family lived in peace, raising children without cruelty, keeping tradition alive, showing respect, the domovoi was kind. He guarded cattle, gave warning of danger, helped find what was lost. But when quarrels filled the house, when drunkenness or dishonesty grew, he could leave, and with him went the sense of warmth, stability, the very breath of home. There was once a story told. One winter night in a village house, a coal rolled from the stove near a child's cradle. The mother woke suddenly, as though nudged by an unseen hand, just in time to lift the child to safety. Later she whispered that she had heard a soft sigh close by. The elders nodded. It was the domovoi who woke you. Give thanks. Beyond the walls of the house lived the leshi, master of the forest, elder spirit of the wild. To him belonged the paths, the beasts, the shadows, and the silence. The leshi did not forgive disrespect. Those who broke branches needlessly, who shouted, who left waste in his domain, he punished. Travellers lost their way, hunters circled endlessly, footsteps led them astray. Yet he could also be a guide. Before entering the forest, hunters bowed to the first tree, left a crust of bread upon a stump. The old men used to say, "If the forest accepts you, your path will be light, your hunt fruitful." In Smolensk province, they told of a hunter who once forgot his offering. He wandered lost among firs for an entire day and night. When he returned home, the first thing he did was carry bread back to the forest and bow. After that, he never lost his way again, and always returned with game. For in every rustle of leaves, someone was listening. By the rivers dwelled the vodyanoi, the water spirit. He lingered beneath mills and banks where the current ran deep. People feared him. Carelessness was not forgiven. He could pull under the reckless, especially those who came without bowing, without a sign of respect, drunk or in jest. The vodyanoi was strict but not evil. He guarded his order. Millers and fishermen learned first how to bargain with him. They cast bits of wool, a crumb of bread, or a coin into the water. If the millstones turned smoothly and the dam did not groan, it meant the vodyanoi was appeased. The rusalki were different, spirits of drowned maidens, often those who had died before marriage, in sorrow or without burial rites. Their strength swelled in spring, especially during Rusalka week. At that time it was forbidden to sing by rivers, to wash clothes, or most of all to swim. In the south, they said Rusalki danced in circles at night across fields, leaving patterns in the morning dew. In the Novgorod land, one woman told how she once heard a faint girl's crying by the river under the full moon. Her mother instructed her, "Leave a bundle of mint, do not look back." She obeyed, and from then on her dreams were peaceful, and her cows gave milk without loss. The bannock, spirit of the bathhouse, was capricious and dangerous. The bathhouse was his domain, and one had to tread carefully. No cursing, no loud laughter, no spitting in corners, no leaving without offering the last drops of water. The third steaming was considered his hour. Then he washed himself, and if disturbed, he could scald, terrify, or bring sickness in dreams. To stay safe, people left silently, crossing themselves at the door. Sometimes they offered him scraps of cloth or a handful of ash. When someone was gravely ill, they were brought into the bathhouse. Prayers whispered to the bannock, asking him to steam away the sickness, always with respect, never with arrogance. Then there was the Tiki Mora, a female spirit linked to unrest, to broken sleep and lost peace. Her presence was sensed in the ticking sounds behind the stove, in heavy dreams, in the unexplained cries of children. She tangled threads, hid objects, whispered through slumber. They said she appeared in homes where something was wrong, where a death had gone without ritual, where order was disturbed. To calm her, people placed a knife beneath the pillow, covered mirrors at night, kept sharp tools off the table. In a village near Vyatka, when a baby cried without ceasing, and neighbours heard footsteps in an empty room, a wise woman was summoned. She found an old rag behind the stove, folded it, whispered words, and burned it. From that night on, silence returned, and the child slept. These spirits were not enemies, they were reminders that everything had a keeper, that every place bore a boundary. They taught attention, they taught silence when silence was needed, gratitude when fortune arrived, and those who respected them found the world returning that respect, and its unseen hands offering protection. In the vision of the ancient slayers, divine order could never be whole without the presence of the feminine. Male gods built the structure, directed the force, defended the world. But true life unfolded in the embrace of those who joined, nourished, guarded, and completed. At the root of existence lay balance, and it was preserved by three great goddesses, Lada, Makosh, and Morena. Each held sway over a dimension of human fate, from love and harmony to harvest and the spinning of time, to the autumn of life and the final journey into Nav. Lada embodied spring, love, joy, and concord. She blessed marriage, peace among people and nature, the renewal of warmth. Her name was sung in songs when the snow melted, when the first sprouts rose, when birds called. Her presence was felt even in the language itself. The word lad carried her essence, meaning harmony. When people said, "The home is Ladno," they meant that Lada was near and all was in order. In the southern lands of Russes and among the plebeian Slavs, her festivals were celebrated with circles of song. Maidens in flower wreaths sang Vesnyanki, spun in round dances and cast their wreaths upon rivers. If the wreath floated, it foretold happy love. If it sank, change was near. The elders taught, when Leda dwells in the home, peace dwells in the art. She was not worshipped like a distant deity, but felt as a living force, present in a kind word, in silence after quarrels, in the smile of a child. Makosh was the goddess of fate, of earth, of fertility. She was known as the Great Mother, she who spun the threads of destiny and guarded the household order. In Rus, Makosh remained among the few goddesses whose cult endured even after Christianity took hold. She was bound to the distaff, to the spindle, to the loom. Women believed every stitch, every knot was more than craft. It was part of the great pattern woven by Makosh herself. Before great changes, marriage, birth, departure, mistresses of homes would place a ball of yarn on the window, tie a new thread and whisper, "Into destiny I ask, let no tangle come." In icon corners beside the saints, there often stood faceless dolls, symbols of Makosh, guardians of the hearth. Her power was felt most vividly in the fields, in the first furrow, in the first rain, in the lushness of green shoots. Makosh was linked to the water's quiet strength, deep, nourishing, unseen yet essential. In times of drought, children would gather by rivers, sprinkling earth with handfuls of water, calling out, "Mother Makosh, give drink. It was no game, but a sign of living connection between earth and sky, between woman and fate. And then there was Morena, or Mara, the goddess of winter, of death, of the threshold between worlds. She was not evil. Her coming was felt as inevitability, as the necessary stillness, the pause when all must be counted, when the circle must close. To fear her was pointless. To respect her was wisdom. For beyond her cold veil waited the mystery of renewal. Morena did not embody destruction, but rest. When trees shed their leaves, when water slowed beneath ice, when frost touched the grass at dawn, it was Morena who walked across the land. She was respected and feared, not as an enemy, but as the one who knew when it was time to close the circle. At Maslenitsa, effigies of straw were fashioned in her image. Dressed in old garments, carried through villages with songs, they were later burned or drowned in rivers. This was not an expulsion, but a ritual farewell to winter, a gesture of gratitude and release. If the effigy burned brightly, it foretold an early spring. If the smoke rose straight, the peace of the departed remained unbroken. In homes where death had visited, offerings to Morena were also made. A cup of water was placed on the window, white cloth spread on the sill, a flame lit. It was not bargaining with the destroyer, but a dialogue with a force that carries away, without malice, without cruelty. In some villages, it was said that Morena held the final thread of life, cutting it only when the song of fate was complete. It was not wrath that guided her hand, but precision. Lada, Makosh and Morena were not rivals, but links of one chain. Spring, summer and winter, birth, harvest and ending, love, destiny and rest. They were not enshrined in temples nor painted in icons, but they were present in daily life, in rituals, in weather, in words. Women knew them by memory, not by scripture. A girl, playing with a doll, wove the image of Lada into its threads. A mother at her spinning wheel felt the breath of Makosh in her yarn. A grandmother, looking silently out the window, would nod. Mora has come. As long as they were remembered, as long as threads were spun with thoughts of home, as long as farewells were given with kind words, the world held its balance. And people knew they were never alone. For the ancient Slav, death was not an end. It was a passage, a movement from one realm into another, a path that began in Yav and continued into Nav, the world of ancestors, of memory, of silence. Those who left life did not vanish. They went into another space, where they existed as long as they were remembered and called. The bond between the living and the dead was not broken. It became invisible, but it endured. For each person, each family, each clan. Death was not sudden, even when it came quickly. It was anticipated, sensed, prepared for. And so every household knew the rites. When death arrived, the space had to be calmed. Sharp tools were removed, buckets carried away, mirrors veiled, windows covered, lest the soul depart too soon before it had been blessed. At the head of the body, a candle was lit. Beside it, a glass of water and a piece of bread. All this was done in silence, without excess words, for death endured no noise. In some regions, especially in the north, it was believed that the soul lingered in the home for 3 days. It wandered, it observed, it grew accustomed to its new state. What mattered was that it not feel fear, not fall into confusion. That is why kin kept vigil, whispering gently, sometimes singing quiet songs of farewell, songs that guided the soul across the threshold. The elders would whisper, Do not call her. She hears without words. Do not hold her back. She will leave on her own. When the time of burial arrived, a sequence of rites began. Rituals meant to prepare the path of passage. The body of the departed was washed by the women of the kin, most often by the elder and experienced. The dead were dressed in clean garments, clothing set aside long before. Beneath the head was placed a cloth, beneath the heels a coin, into the hands a piece of bread or a strip of fabric. Sometimes even a wooden spoon was left nearby so the soul could eat along the journey. Nothing was without meaning. Nothing was done idly. The body was carried out feet first, always across the threshold. Upon the threshold lay birch bark or straw, which was later burned. Doors and windows of the home were left open, so that the way would be clear without barriers. Afterward the house itself was cleansed, smoke of herbs filling the rooms, water used to wash the body poured outside the yard, never kept, for it belonged to Nav, not Yav. The road to the cemetery was walked in silence. At the front went one of the younger relatives. At crossroads, branches or stones were laid down, so the soul would not return along the same path. After burial, the family came home by a different way, never retracing their steps. Upon entering, they washed their faces, changed their clothes, and sat at the memorial meal. This meal was not mourning, but meeting. The first piece of bread was set on the edge of the table. The first cup was not drunk, but left for the soul. No loud voices were raised, no gossip spoken. The food was simple. Porridge, jelly, pancakes. Their taste was not important. What mattered was remembrance, the calling of names, the stirring of memory. Days that followed carried meaning of their own. On the 9th day, the soul reached the boundary of Nav, where it was met by kin. On the 40th it crossed fully if it had been released. These days were marked again by offerings, candles lit, bread baked, words spoken. Are you with us? We remember. Yet even beyond this crossing, the bond with the dead was never broken. Throughout the year, special dates were kept. Radonitsa, the joyful meeting with ancestors, Didi, the autumn feast of remembrance, the Saturdays of the departed. On these days, tables were laid, food left on windowsills or under trees, names spoken aloud, not as of shadows, but of those who had lived, who remained. They were awaited in dreams, listened for in signs, spoken of in stories to children. At the centre of all stood the spirit of the rod, not one ancestor, but the living force that bound generations. He had no face, but was felt in crucial moments, at births, at illness, at weddings, in times of hardship. To him candles were lit, prayers murmured, gazes cast into flame. The elders advised, when you do not know what to do, ask the rod. But if one left without rite, suddenly in anger, without words, without burial, the soul could lose its path. And such souls became restless. They did not seek to harm, but they searched for a way. Then in houses cold draughts might stir, heavy dreams might fall, unease without cause might creep in. To help them, families called for a wise woman, laid offerings at the door, lit candles, placed a piece of bread on the threshold. Sometimes the dead were named aloud. You were, we remember, go in peace. And most often, when reverence was shown, death passed quietly. The house did not become empty, it simply breathed in a different way. Within it lingered a presence, not frightening but familiar. If at night a floorboard creaked or the stove's fire dimmed, no one trembled. They only said, "He came to look." Among all Slavic tales, one stood above the rest, greater than a myth, closer to a law of the universe. It was the story of the eternal struggle between Perun and Veles, the ancient balance without which neither weather, nor order, nor life itself could endure. People repeated it at the crack of thunder, in the fall of rain, at the start of harvest, and in the darkest nights when the air felt taut, as if unseen powers once more met in combat above. Perun, god of thunder, lightning, justice, and warlike might, was seen as the heavenly guardian of order. His symbol was the oak, his weapon the stone axe, or the fiery bolt, his finger hurled from the sky. Perun guarded the borders of Yav, punished oath-breakers, cleansed the earth of all that broke free of control. He was invoked in civil strife, called upon in drought, thanked after rainfall. His image was tied to the summit of the world, unreachable, yet mighty. Veles was different. He did not dwell on the heights, but in the lowlands, at the boundary of Yav and Nav. He lived in fog, in forest thickets, in roots and stumps, in underground springs. He was patron of cattle, of trade, of knowledge and poetry, and guardian of the souls of the dead. His forms were shifting, serpent, bull, bear. He could mislead a traveller, aid a sage, guide a healer. He did not hurl lightning, but sent dreams. And the myth of their conflict was known among nearly all the Slavs. In it Veles committed the boldest act. He stole from Perun, sometimes the heavenly cattle, sometimes clouds, sometimes wealth, sometimes time itself, or even Perun's wife, depending on the region. Perun always discovered the theft. He rose in fury, lifted his weapon, and the storm broke. He thundered, he flashed, he poured rain and hurled wind. Thus began the heavenly pursuit. Perun chased his foe, who slipped away, hiding in a swamp, transforming into a tree, plunging into an underground river. Each time Perun found him, lightning struck, and from this battle, people read the skies. If lightning split the earth, it meant Perun had struck his enemy. If the storm came in waves, it meant Veles had changed his shape, and the chase was not yet over. But storms always pass, and when the silence came, what then? The meaning of the battle was never in one god's victory over the other. It symbolized the eternal rhythm of nature, rising and calming, heat and rain, silence and thunder. Without Veles there would be no motion. Without Perun, no measure. One disrupted order to test its strength. The other restored it to preserve the world. And each year, especially in spring, the cycle began anew. The elders would say, if thunder rolls from the east, Perun is chasing Veles. If it comes from the south, he has already struck him. They also believed that when Perun's bolt pierced the serpent, a spring would burst from the ground. And so, at the sites of lightning strikes, people placed crosses or laid stones, marks of purification, signs of memory. In villages along the Kama River, an old custom survived. At the first storm of spring, men would walk beyond the village, stand beneath the sky, and one would throw an aspen log into the grass, declaring, "Drive him, Perun, not into us, but into the unclean." Then all returned in silence, bareheaded, in reverence. It was said that if the first thunder was heard with a pure heart, the year would be abundant. Even wedding rites were shaped by the myth. The groom played the role of Perun, the bride that of Veles's daughter, to be ransomed, led away, returned to the order of kin. Thus the ritual echoed the eternal union of sky and earth, of power, mystery, truth, and depth. But quarrels always ended, if only for a while. Veles restored what he had taken. The storm quieted, the sky cleared. People stepped into the fields. gazed at the raindrops on leaves and whispered, "The world is in its place again." This myth was never told as a tale with a beginning and an end. It was a living explanation of existence, where there is no light without shadow, no truth without temptation, no rain without lightning. And so, whenever thunder rolled, whenever air tightened, whenever lightning split an oak, it was not mere weather. It was the memory of ancient powers calling to one another. They were not friends nor enemies, but elder brothers, each knowing the price of might and the limits of his own. And then came the moment when Prince Vladimir chose to baptize Rus. It was not only a change of faith, it was a sudden turn in the understanding of the world, a shift from a pagan system where all was bound to nature, to cycles, to ancestral spirits, toward a singular Christian vision of God, church, and canon. Yet just as a tree cannot cut away its roots, the people could not forget their old gods. Christianization spread from the top downward, from the prince to the boyars, from the boyars to the warriors, from the warriors to the cities. But in the villages where farmers ploughed the soil, herdsmen tended cattle, women gathered herbs, and wedding songs were sung, there the ancient faith still breathed, and its breath carried on in whispers, hidden beneath new prayers. Perun, whom legend says was cast from his shrine into the Dnieper, did not vanish into oblivion. He drifted into the current of memory and returned in another form, in thunder, in lightning, in the stormlit sky. Veles, guardian of cattle, of wisdom, of boundaries, disappeared from altars but lingered in proverbs, in the herding rites, in the food still left in forests for benevolent spirits. The Church, in its doctrine, sought to root out paganism, branding it idol worship, naming its gods as demons, yet to erase centuries of ritual proved impossible. Instead of open war, it turned to reinterpretation. The festivals remained, but with new names, new meanings, new patrons. Thus the Day of Elijah, falling at the height of thunder season, became the Christian mask of Perun. To Saint Elijah were given thunder and lightning, and the people quickly accepted the new guise. On that day no fieldwork was permitted lest the saint be angered, and the elders still whispered during storms, "The thunderer is furious." Veles, keeper of animals, transformed into Saint Blaise, protector of herds and horned cattle. His day, in February, was marked with charms against livestock disease, with bread, honey and water left in barns, with homes fumigated with wormwood, almost as before Christianity came. The women's rights, bound to fertility and the cycle of seasons, did not vanish but slid into tradition. Cupola bonfires became evening revelries. Wreaths floated down rivers, now said to be for beauty. Divinations were explained away as games. The festivals endured, but the names of goddesses dissolved into Mother Damp Earth, or simply Mother Nature. Paganism did not die. It slipped into shadow. Its figures ceased to be gods, but remained powers. The domovoi was no longer a deity, but the household spirit. The Leshy was not evil, but dangerous if his forest was disrespected. The Rusalki were no longer water goddesses, but drowned maidens, still given offerings on riverbanks. Faith became double-layered. People crossed themselves, lit candles in churches, wed under icons, and were buried with Christian prayers. Yet they still placed knives under pillows against the evil eye, smoked herbs through houses before childbirth, and never showed newborns to strangers before 40 days passed. Such acts were not seen as superstition. They were simply the way things were done. Everyday magic bound to harvest and survival, to memory and kinship lived on, in whispers, in gestures, in quiet actions. For beneath the cross, the old gods still breathed. Some knew which day was forbidden for travel. Others whispered charms over water so it would wash away fear. This knowledge was not called pagan, yet it had no roots in Christianity. It came from deeper soil. Ethnographers of the 19th century recorded dozens of instances where village rites did not match church canon. In one village near Yaroslavl, men stepped outside before a storm, laid an iron knife on the ground and whispered, "Do not strike thunder. We honour you." In Policia, on Elijah's day, people still cast an onion marked with Perun's name into the fire. In the north, peasants prayed to St. Nicholas, but not as a saint, as a god of roads and justice, a role closest to the ancient divine. In the language of the people, faith and superstition walked side by side. They did not draw sharp lines between where church ended and tradition began. They simply lived in the weaving of both, where a prayer might start with "Lord, help me," and end with words passed down from a great-grandmother. Even the word Vedma, once meaning the knowing woman, grew into an insult. Those who held knowledge of herbs, childbirth, and illness were feared, yet still people sought them, especially in secret, especially by night, for whispered cures. By the 15th century, most pagan plots were no longer taken as myth. They had become folklore, woven into tales and proverbs. Yet even in stories of the dragon Zmej Gorinich or Ivan Tsarevich, echoes of pre-Christian thought could be heard. The struggle for balance, the might of nature, the reverence for earth and fire. Thus, Christianity and paganism never fully parted. They fused, unevenly. The heights belonged to the church, the depths remained with the people. Official in the altar lived in the hut. The priest gave sermons, but after the service a grandmother cured fright with her spells, and so the old gods did not vanish. They became something else. They left the prayers but lingered in the songs. They disappeared from the hilltops but remained in the hearth. Their names faded, but their place in the soul of the people held fast, stronger than it seemed. When the days of shrines and sacred groves were gone, when the names of the old gods slipped from memory, when the rituals of ancestors were called superstition, the myth found shelter in the tale. Story became the refuge where memory of the earlier world could live without prohibition. In spoken word, in parable, in children's games, in songs by the stove, Slavic mythology did not vanish. It disguised itself. The essence endured, but the form was changed. And among its most enduring forms was Baba Yaga, one of the oldest and most resilient figures in folklore. In her, scholars see traces of the archaic goddess of death and transition, perhaps a shadow of Makosh, perhaps of an even older guardian between worlds. Her hut stands not merely in the forest, but on the boundary, between Yav and Nav. She is not purely evil. She is the tester. She challenges the hero, yet may give him advice, an object, a path, if only he shows respect, and if he does not. The forest closes. The mortar and the broom of Baba Yaga are not household tools, but symbols. Purification, motion along unseen paths. The oven where she threatens to place the hero is not always punishment, but a ritual of rebirth, echoing the ancient rites of cleansing by fire. The Zmej Gorinich, the three-headed fire-breathing serpent, is no mere monster. In its form intertwine the archaic images of chaotic forces of nature, the underworld, drought, and perhaps Veles in his stormborn or chthonic aspect. He guards the access to sources, whether living water or hidden knowledge. The hero who defeats him does not merely triumph in battle. he restores a broken order. In this clash sounds the echo of the older myth, the duel of Perun and Veles, where the thunderer triumphs over the thief of the deep and returns what was stolen. Ilya Muromets is a figure of passage, a fusion of pagan and Christian layers. His tale begins with 30 years spent motionless on a stove, until he rises with sudden, wondrous strength. This is no accident, it is a classic motif of the mythic hero, passing through withdrawal and awakening. His power is given by mysterious wanderers, perhaps fate itself, perhaps divine messengers. Later folklore blends his role with Perun. He battles unclean forces, defends borders, punishes betrayal. Yet his might is always granted, never innate, binding him not to personal will, but to the higher order. In countless folk tales, structures and symbols survive from these ancient myths. The hero journeys through 3 realms, undergoes trials, meets helpers and enemies. Each stage mirrors initiation, the death of oneself, the rebirth of another. The golden feather, the flying carpet, the ring, the magic steed. These are not just marvels, but symbols of passage, tokens of dominion over the elements. Even secondary figures, the domovoi, the leshi, the vodyanoi, the rusalka, live on in story. No longer gods, they are remembered as spirits, as unclean ones, yet still bearing the marks of their old power. The domovoi is not the god of kin, but the guardian of hearth. The leshi, no longer lord of the forest, is its wild dweller, dangerous if disturbed. The rusalka is not a goddess of waters, but the soul of a drowned maiden, and yet still she restrains the force of living streams. These beings lost their sacred thrones, but not their function, to guard, to test, to aid. What matters is that the tale did not preserve the names of the gods, but their principles. The world remains layered, underworld, earthly, heavenly. The hero must still walk the path, prove his strength, endure temptation, and choose the right way. Every gift must be paid for. Every mistake has its cost. Thus, even in the most innocent children's stories, the skeleton of the old myth still beats, its rhythm recognized intuitively. By the 19th century, when folklore became the subject of scholarship, collectors like Afanasieff, Sakharov, Buslaev began to record the tales, rites, legends. What was once only a fireside story revealed itself as a vast archive of memory, woven from pagan roots, Christian reworkings, and the wisdom of survival. Through tales, not only children learned. Through them, an entire people preserved its vision of the world. The fairy tale became the last sanctuary of the old order. There the spirits found refuge when they were exiled from the temple. There the archetypes dwelt when canon could no longer contain them. And so each storyteller, whether peasant or scholar, mother or wanderer, continued to speak, often unknowingly, in the language of the old gods, without names perhaps, yet with their rhythm, with their laws, with their breath. Thus ended the story of the gods, and thus began the life of the tale. But in truth, they are one and the same story, told by 2 voices, and if one listens carefully, through the turns of old fairy words one can still hear it, the eternal breath.